A velvet curtain, though only a metaphor here, might as well have been real. The set of the view glowed in the familiar palette of warm ambers and deep blues, but today those colors felt colder, heavier, as though the lights themselves knew something was about to break. Natalie Portman sat in her chair with the elegance of someone who had walked countless red carpets, but her posture betrayed a subtle readiness, a coiled grace that came from years of navigating unpredictable questions. Across the semicircle table, Whoopi Goldberg shifted ever so slightly, leaning forward, elbows resting on the glossy surface. Her gaze was steady, not hostile, not warm, but surgical. The hum of the audience, that low rustle of whispers and shifting legs, began to fall into silence. The camera's red light blinked alive, and millions of viewers at home joined that circle without stepping foot in the studio. Then came the moment. Whoopi's voice cut clean through the air measured, deliberate, but weighted. "Natalie," she began, "you've been lauded for your recent philanthropic campaign. But some of the people on the ground, the marginalized voices you say, you're lifting feel they've been silenced instead, that your spotlight has drowned theirs." It was not a question. It was an accusation wrapped in calm diction. A flash of confusion crossed Natalie's face, quickly masked, but not before the cameras caught it. The close-up framed the faint twitch in her jaw, the way her fingers subtly tensed against her lap. Somewhere off to her right, a producer's clipboard capped twice an unconscious tick, betraying the tension even behind the cameras. Inside, Natalie felt the accusation burrow under her ribs. Silenced them? The words reverberated. She had poured herself into that campaign, poured her name, her reputation, her time. She thought she had been amplifying the very people Whoopi claimed she had eclipsed. But in the pit of her stomach, a heavier question began to take root. Had she mistaken her reach for righteousness? The narration of her mind gave way to the key. Sounds around her, the hushed intake of breath from someone in the audience, the faint creak of the set as a co-host shifted, the mechanical whir of the camera refocusing. Whoopi didn't blink. "With great visibility comes great responsibility," she continued, her voice lowering, each word deliberate. "But whose voices are you lifting, Natalie, and whose are you stifling?" The silence afterward was more deafening than any applause. Natalie's lips parted slightly, an instinctive response to fill the void with defense, explanation, something. But the weight of the moment pressed her back into her seat. Her heartbeat thudded so loudly she could almost hear it in her ears, out in living rooms across the country. Viewers leaned closer to their screens. Social media timelines began to ignite. In real time, clips were already being cut, quotes already being typed out. She finally spoke soft, deliberate. "I believe I've been lifting them. But if that's not how they feel, then maybe I've been too far from the ground to see it." Her tone was not defiant, but it carried an edge born of someone suddenly aware they were standing at the center of a moral storm. The studio lights hummed above, casting their steady glow. The conversation was only just beginning, but the fault line had been drawn, and the world, both in that room and beyond, could feel it. The segment cut to commercial, but the atmosphere in the studio didn't exhale. Crew members moved briskly, adjusting cables and refilling water mugs, yet their eyes kept darting toward the table. The faint buzz of whispered speculation hung in the air like static before a storm. Natalie sat still, hands folded in her lap. Her mind replayed Whoopi's words again and again, not just the accusation, but the certainty with which it had been delivered. The power of it wasn't in its volume, but in the implication that it had been heard before, from others, quietly. Until now, a stagehand leaned close. 2 minutes. She nodded without looking up. In that suspended space before the cameras returned, her thoughts raced through the campaign that had brought her here. The images of her at rallies, the interviews, the op-eds carrying her name. She remembered the carefully lit photos with community leaders, the hashtags, the media cycles. But then came the darker memories, the email she'd skimmed, late one night from a small activist collective asking for more credit on the joint project. The organizer's message had been polite but firm. We appreciate your support, but our own messaging isn't reaching the public. We're just a footnote at the time. She'd filed it away under public relations follow-up and moved on. Now, that same organizer's words seemed to echo Whoopi's on-air charge. The screen above the audience counted down. 5, 4, 3. We're live again. Whoopi didn't waste time. Natalie, some grassroots organizers have been vocal publicly about feeling overshadowed. These aren't anonymous critics. They're the people you were supposed to partner with. What's your response to them? Natalie inhaled, the kind that fills not just the lungs, but the silence itself. I've always believed my role was to draw attention to their work, she said, eyes steady but softened. But if they feel muted by my presence, then I've clearly misjudged something important. Sunny Hostin leaned in, her tone probing but not hostile. Do you think celebrity involvement in activism sometimes risks consuming the story instead of supporting it? Natalie hesitated, not because she didn't know the answer, but because the answer might betray more truth than she was ready to give. I think, she began slowly, it's possible. And maybe I've been guilty of that without realizing it. Her admission sent a ripple through the audience. Not applause, not disapproval. Just a subtle, collective intake of breath-like. They'd all felt the weight of her words drop into the room. The camera cut to Whoopi, who regarded her with a mix of scrutiny and something almost resembling respect. Recognizing that, Whoopi said, is one thing. What you do with it, that's what matters. The exchange was clipped for social media before the commercial break even ended. On Twitter, hashtags flared. Portman on The View, celebrity activism, Whoopi vs. Natalie. Activists who had worked with her began posting old photos, some praising her commitment, others sharing instances where their own contributions had been left uncredited. Backstage, a producer whispered into her earpiece during a video segment, "They're already pulling your old campaign footage for the next block." It wasn't a warning. It was a countdown. Natalie's thoughts turned to the people whose names had been lost under hers in headlines. She remembered a young climate advocate from Nairobi whose quote she'd loved but never attributed in a televised speech. She remembered an indigenous leaders project she'd posted about without linking to their fundraising page. At the time, these had felt like small oversights. Now, under the harsh studio lights, they were being rearranged into a pattern she hadn't wanted to see. The cameras returned to the panel. This time, Natalie didn't wait for the question. If I've failed to credit or empower the voices I've worked alongside, I take responsibility for that. And I want to fix it on their terms, not mine. The words were out before she had time to calculate their costs. In homes across the country, the statement landed differently. Some heard humility, others smelled damage control. But one thing was certain, this conversation had left the realm of polite promotion. The court of public opinion had just called its first witness. The lights above the set cast their steady glow, but for Natalie, it felt as though the brightness had shifted, become sharper, almost interrogatory. She sat straighter now, not out of confidence, but out of instinct, the way one braces when the ground feels less stable beneath their feet. Commercial breaks had turned into miniature war rooms. Producers shuffled between her and Whoopi, sharing notes, checking run times, making small talk. It was too casual to be real. But every glance carried the same unspoken message. The show had found its moment, and they weren't going to let it go. When the cameras came back, Sarah Ans leaned forward, her voice gentler but no less piercing. Natalie, you've always been vocal about your own family's history. about growing up with stories of displacement, resilience, and the fight for justice. Do you think that history has made you maybe overconfident in knowing what marginalized communities need? The question was surgical. It reached past the campaign, past the headlines, straight into the personal. Natalie's gaze dropped briefly to the table. Her mind flashed to Friday night dinners at her parents' home, to her father's quiet recounting of fleeing anti-Semitism, to her mother's insistence on giving time and money to causes that felt close to the bone. She thought of how she'd carried that torch into her adult life, assuming she could bridge any gap through passion alone. "I think," she said, her voice measured, "that I've relied too much on my own lens. I believed empathy was enough. I see now it's not." In the front row, a woman in the audience, a teacher, judging by the school lanyard, nodded almost imperceptibly. But others sat with their arms crossed, skeptical, weighing each word like jurors in a trial. Whoopi's tone softened, but her eyes didn't. "It's not about whether your intentions were good, Natalie. It's about whether your actions left space for others to lead. That's what people are asking." Natalie met her gaze. "And maybe I didn't leave enough space. Maybe I thought the best way to help was to stand in front. But that can block the light for the people who need it most." The room seemed to hold its breath. Behind the scenes, her publicist, seated off camera, scribbled furiously on a legal pad. "Address this after show. Find organizers. Outreach ASAP." But Natalie wasn't thinking about damage control anymore. She was thinking about a text she'd received 2 months ago from a young activist in Chicago after a joint panel appearance. "You were amazing. But I wish more people had asked me about my work instead of your movie roles. At the time." She had laughed softly, thinking it was just an observation. Now it felt like a warning she'd ignored. Sunny jumped in, threading another needle. "The tricky part about celebrity advocacy," she said, "is that you can shine a huge light on a cause. But that light can blind the public to the people actually living it." Natalie's shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. "Then maybe the challenge for me is learning when to step aside. Not out of the fight, but out of the spotlight." The audience murmured, a ripple of recognition passing through the rows. Social media producers in the back of the studio were already slicing this exchange into a bite-sized clip, the kind that travels faster than any formal statement. It would be on Instagram before Natalie even left the building. But for now, in this moment, she wasn't speaking for the cameras, or even for Whoopi. She was speaking to the people whose work had been overshadowed by her presence, even if unintentionally. And for the first time since the accusation, her voice carried not the polished cadence of a celebrity on a talk show, but the unsteady rhythm of someone confronting their own reflection. And that, the viewers could feel. The next segment began. Without the usual small talk, the warmth that The View often wrapped around its discussions had cooled into something taut, deliberate. The panel leaned in physically and intellectually ready to dig into a layer deeper than simple mea culpas. This time, it was Whoopi who broke the quiet. "Let's talk about the difference between advocacy and ownership," she said, her tone steady but weighted. "When a celebrity speaks for a movement, even with the best intentions, the message changes. Sometimes it gets bigger, but sometimes it gets bent. And sometimes it becomes about the celebrity." Her words landed with the precision of a gavel. Natalie adjusted in her seat, fingers curling slightly against her knee. "I've always believed the visibility I have could help," she replied. "That by drawing the press, I was drawing attention to the cause. I didn't realize it could distort the cause in the process." The audience shifted in their chairs, sensing the philosophical territory being staked out. This wasn't about a single campaign anymore. It was about the mechanics of influence itself. Sunny jumped in. "We've seen this before. Big names step in and suddenly the media stops covering the organizers. The community leaders become footnotes to their own stories. Natalie nodded, but her voice was firmer now. Then the challenge isn't to abandon advocacy, but to do it differently, to lend the platform, not replace the platform. Sarah tilted her head, but lending means ceding control. Are you ready to do that? Are you ready for the story not to be about you at all? That question hung heavy. It wasn't accusatory, it was existential. Natalie hesitated, not from doubt, but from understanding the cost. If the story was never supposed to be about me, she said slowly, then maybe I was never in control to begin with. Maybe I just thought I was. The silence that followed was charged, the kind that makes viewers at home lean closer, like they might hear something in the quiet that the microphones couldn't catch. Whoopi pressed on, her voice lower now, almost reflective. There's a responsibility in knowing when to speak and when to stand back. If you take the mic, you decide what gets heard. If you pass it, you decide who gets to speak. That choice, that's where the power lives. Natalie felt the truth of it in her bones. It was the same power she'd held without question for years, believing that her presence was inherently additive. But sitting here, she saw it differently. It could be subtractive too. The ideological divide became tangible, not between the panel and her, but within her own mind. Two convictions collided, that silence in the face of injustice was unacceptable, and that speaking without making space for others was another form of silencing. A few rows back, a young woman in a hoodie raised her phone discreetly, recording. Her eyes flicked between the two women at the table, absorbing every exchange as if it were a masterclass in moral negotiation. Natalie leaned forward, voice steady now. Then maybe my role isn't to stand at the center. Maybe it's to make sure the center is big enough for everyone else to stand in too. Whoopi studied her for a beat, then gave the faintest nod. Not agreement, not absolution, just acknowledgement. Off camera. The show's social media team exchanged quick glances. They could feel it too. This wasn't just a clash, it was the crystallizing of an idea, the kind of television moment that lingers long after the credits roll. And as the segment wrapped, the lines between critique and collaboration began to blur. But the tension, ideological, personal, and public, remained, thrumming beneath the studio's bright lights, waiting for the next exchange to ignite it again. The segment transitioned into something unusual for the View Alive video call. The producers had decided mid-show to bring in voices from the communities at the heart of the controversy. The control room's choice was bold, almost reckless. This wasn't pre-taped, and it wasn't sanitized. On the large screen behind the panel, a young woman's face appeared. Her backdrop was modest, a plain wall with a single bookshelf behind her. She introduced herself as Amara, a climate justice advocate from Nairobi. Her voice was calm, but edged with urgency. Double quotes Natalie. When you visited Kenya last year, you gave powerful speeches, she began. But local organizers struggled to get their own coverage. Reporters followed you, not U.S. We lost momentum on our campaigns once the cameras left with you. Natalie's breath caught slightly. The words were not hostile, but they were sharp enough to cut. Amara, I never meant, she began, but Amara held up her hand gently. I believe you, she said, but intention doesn't erase impact. The screen split to reveal another caller, this time from Chicago. A young racial justice organizer named Luis adjusted his headset. When you reposted our protest on Instagram, we were grateful. But you didn't tag our group. Thousands saw your post, but they didn't know who we were. Donations went to bigger organizations, not ours. The audience was silent, their attention fixed on the screen as much as on Natalie. Natalie's voice lowered. You're right. I should have been more deliberate. I should have amplified you directly, not just the issue. Luis gave a small nod. It's not about canceling you. It's about reminding you your reach can change lives, but it can also change the direction of who gets helped. The third face on the screen was an Indigenous youth leader from Canada, a teenager named Sky. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from the weight of speaking truth to someone with far more public power. When you spoke about our land rights, you used your words beautifully, but you didn't invite us to speak beside you. People remember your speech, not our struggle. Natalie felt the words like stones in her chest. Sky, you're right. And I'm sorry. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, letting the exchange breathe. This wasn't about the hosts anymore. It was about the collision between celebrity advocacy and lived experience, playing out in real time before millions. Sarah finally broke the silence. This is what accountability looks like, not just an apology, but listening in public without defense. Natalie nodded, her voice steady but softer now. I can't change what's already happened, but I can change what happens next. That means tagging your names, sharing your platforms, standing behind you instead of in front of you. And not just saying it here, but doing it. In the control room, a producer mouthed to a colleague, "We're going viral." They knew the footage of these testimonies, raw and unfiltered, would dominate online discourse for days. But for those at the table, the moment wasn't about virality. It was about the undeniable truth hanging between them. Natalie Portman, an Academy Award-winning actress with global influence, was being asked, not politely, but firmly, to shift the way she used her power. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was measured, deliberate, a recognition not of resolution, but of the courage to confront a difficult truth without hiding behind PR safe lines. And as the screen faded back to the show's warm-toned set, the air in the studio felt heavier, thicker. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was testimony, and Natalie had just been placed under moral oath. The studio had settled into a charged stillness. Even the camera operators seemed slower in their movements now, as though afraid to disturb the balance of what was unfolding. The testimonies still echoed in the air, heavy with truth that couldn't be waved away. Whoopi broke the silence first, her tone neither cruel nor comforting, just precise. "Natalie, the thing about moments like this is that people watch what you do next. Not just here on TV, but tomorrow, next month, next year. They remember who showed up and how." Natalie straightened, hands clasped loosely on the table. Her gaze met Whoopi's without wavering. "I hear everything they've said. I hear you. And I can't undo the harm, but I can stop it from repeating." The audience was so still that the hum of the studio lights filled the space like background music. Sonny leaned in, eyes sharp but voice calm. "Then what does that mean in practice? Because apologizing on air is easy. Changing structures, changing habits, that's the work." Natalie's voice gained weight. "It means opening my platform to them, giving them direct access to my team, my resources. It means when there's a camera on me, there will also be one on them. Not after I speak, not in a side post, side by side." Sarah tilted her head, almost skeptical. "That's a promise that costs. Are you prepared to give up some of the attention that keeps your advocacy relevant?" Natalie didn't flinch. "Yes, because if the attention only works when it's mine, then it's not really advocacy. It's ego dressed as justice." A ripple moved through the audience, some murmurs of approval, some subdued claps. Whoopi's expression shifted slightly, the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth, but she didn't let up. "Words are fine, but people have heard words before. Are you ready to commit here now to bringing these three people, Amara, Luis, Sky, into your platform immediately? To letting them take the mic from you?" Natalie's breath deepened. "Yes, today. If they'll have me, I'll post there." Work by tonight. And I'll ask them what else they need, before I assume I know. Sky's face reappeared briefly on the studio screen, her voice small but steady. Then we'll hold you to that. Natalie nodded once, almost like accepting a verdict. Please do. In the audience, a young man in the second row raised his phone to record. His caption, written later, would go viral. Accountability looks like this, but the confrontation wasn't over. Sonny pressed again, leaning into the tension. Natalie, you've built a brand on speaking for the voiceless. Will you admit here that sometimes that has meant taking their place instead of standing beside them? Natalie's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. Yes, I see that now. And I won't pretend it's just a misunderstanding. It's a pattern I have to break. Her words fell into the room like a stone into water heavy at first, then rippling outward, touching every listener in some way. The panel paused, letting the weight of the moment settle before Whoopi closed the segment. We're not here to destroy anyone, she said, voice steady. We're here to make sure the work is done right. If you mean what you've said today, Natalie, then this isn't the end of the conversation. It's the beginning. Natalie exhaled, her shoulders lowering ever so slightly. Then I'm ready to begin. The applause this time was stronger. Not a standing ovation, not celebration, but an acknowledgement of something rare on live television. A public figure not just absorbing criticism, but agreeing to change under. Its weight. The cameras panned wide as the show cut to break. But the feeling in the room didn't dissipate. It lingered thick, electric, almost historic. The kind of moment that replays itself in headlines and think pieces for weeks. The kind that sets a marker in the timeline of a public life. And somewhere deep in Natalie's mind, beyond the lights and the eyes and the cameras, a new understanding had already begun to take root. The show's closing theme faded out, but the set didn't lose its heat. Crew members moved with quiet precision, wrapping cables, dimming lights, and gathering mics. In the audience, no one rushed to leave. People lingered, their faces still caught in the gravity of what they just witnessed. Natalie remained in her seat for a moment, after the cameras stopped rolling, her hands resting in her lap, the adrenaline still coursing. She could feel the echo of her own voice, the things she had promised, vibrating in her chest. It was one thing to speak with conviction under studio lights. It was another to take those words out into the world before the glow faded. Amara, Louise, and Sky, 3 names now etched into her mind, appeared in her phone's contacts within the hour. Sonny had slipped her a note with their preferred ways to connect. No handlers, no PR gatekeepers. This part's on you, Sonny had said quietly before, leaving the table. By the time Natalie stepped into her black SUV, the New York air felt sharper, heavier. Paparazzi shouted questions as flashes popped in rapid bursts. Natalie, did Whoopi ambush you? Was it all scripted? Do you regret coming on? She didn't answer. Instead, she kept her eyes forward, thinking only of the faces she'd seen on the studio screens. Back at her hotel, she opened her laptop before even removing her coat. The glow of the screen painted her face in cold light. No press statement, no carefully worded publicist draft. Just a raw, unfiltered post on her social media. Today, on The View, I was reminded that advocacy is not a stage for me to stand on. It's a table to sit at, with room for every voice. Tonight, I'm handing my platform to Amara, Luis, and Sky. You'll hear directly from them, uncut, unedited, uninterrupted. Hold me to my word. She attached links to their work, their causes, and a commitment. 1 week where all her public channels would feature only their content. Almost instantly. Notifications lit up her phone. Some applauded, some doubted, some accused her of performative damage control. She didn't argue with any of them. The next morning, Natalie woke to an email from Sky. It was brief. I appreciate the gesture. Just know this isn't about saving face, it's about saving focus. We'll see if you mean it. Natalie replied within minutes. I do, and I'm ready to follow your lead. By midday, her social media looked unfamiliar even to her. Her face was gone from the profile picture, replaced with a black and white portrait of Amara taken during a housing protest. Her bio now read, "This week is not about me, it's about them." Journalists pounced on the change. Screenshots flew across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Pundits debated whether it was a bold act of humility or a PR strategy disguised as a penance. Whoopi, appearing on a late-night show that evening, addressed the follow-up without naming Natalie directly. Sometimes, the real test isn't how you handle the fire, it's what you build from the ashes. That line would be replayed alongside Natalie's social posts in countless recap videos. But for Natalie herself, the noise didn't matter as much as the quiet, private calls she began making. Listening more than speaking. Asking what resources actually helped. Offering, not insisting. Somewhere between the third and fourth conversation that week, she realized she was no longer defending her reputation. She was defending their work. And that, for the first time in a long time, felt like the right fight. To be in the morning news cycle hit like a tidal wave. Clips from The View that charged exchange, the pause before Natalie's answer, the sharp cut to commercial were now stitched into montages alongside pundit commentary and talk radio. Sound bites. On CNN, a political analyst leaned forward, eyebrows raised. This isn't just celebrity drama. It's a case study in platform ethics. She has influence measured in millions. Who controls that influencer, or the people she claims to represent? Across the dial, a conservative panelist on a rival network scoffed. This is performative guilt at its finest. If she truly cared, she wouldn't need cameras to do the right thing. Natalie scrolled past the noise. The internet had no pause button. Her notifications read like an ongoing trial half, the jury ready to crown her a model of humility. Other half prepared to convict her of self-serving theatrics. Beneath the debate, something else was happening. The posts from Amara, Luis, and Sky were gaining traction far beyond Natalie's usual audience. Amara's live stream on housing rights hit 500,000 views in 2 days more than her last 6 months of organizing combined. Luce's thread on immigration reform was retweeted by a U.S. senator. Sky's op-ed made the front page of a national environmental blog. But the more their voices rose, the more scrutiny followed. One tabloid dug up an old tweet from Sky, twisting it into a headline meant to undermine the cause. Another ran grainy photos of Luis at a protest, framing him as radical. Amara's inbox began filling with hate mail and veiled threats. Natalie felt the shift in the air. She had brought them into her light, but the light was blinding. Then sometimes it burned. By Thursday, a trending hashtag appeared, Portman Project. It was meant to be a rallying point, but it quickly splintered. Some used it to share the causes. Others used it to mock them, to reduce everything to memes and cynical jokes. Natalie found herself on a call with all three activists late that night. Amara's voice was tired. This isn't what we wanted. We wanted attention for the work, not this circus. Luis exhaled audibly. You gave us the megaphone, Natalie. But you didn't tell us the crowd might throw rocks. Sky was blunt. You need to decide if you're in this for the week or for the war, because the backlash is part of the deal. She listened without interrupting. The words stung, not because they were unfair, but because they were true. She had stepped into their world thinking she was handing over space. In reality, she had dragged them into hers. The next morning, she made another public post. No photos, no hashtags, no dramatic captions. To everyone following the Portman Project, stop tagging me. follow them directly, support them directly. They don't need my name to validate their work. They are the work. It was a strange kind of release, letting the movement grow without her shadow hanging over it. But it also left her exposed. Without the buffer of the spotlight, she was no longer a hero in the narrative. She was just a woman who had been publicly challenged, who had promised to do better, and who now had to prove it quietly.